You don't believe in morality because you're using the wrong method. Aristotle said it is the mark of an educated man to look for precision in each class of things just so far as the nature of the subject admits. It is evidently equally foolish to accept probable reasoning from a mathematician and to demand from the rhetorician scientific proofs. In other words, different subjects require different methods. We are aiming at the wrong mark when we expect the wrong kind of reason for the wrong kind of thing. That's especially true of morality. So let's take a step back and talk about method. Today, we often expect scientific formulations for moral truth. We want math experiments, something you can put in a beaker and look at under a microscope. But morality isn't chemistry. And to expect from morality the same type of scientific data you get from such a discipline is a non sequitur. You can't isolate justice in a lab. You can't weigh courage on a scale. You can't run an experiment on the substance of goodness. And when morality refuses to behave like science, people just assume that it means it isn't real, most often because they think knowledge only comes from one kind of inquiry, which is a different conversation. But Aristotle would say that's not a failure of morality, that's a failure of method. So the question becomes, what should we expect methodologically from morality? Not scientific results, but common recognition. And this is exactly the argument that C.S. Lewis makes in The Abolition of Man. Lewis argues that if moral truth is real, we shouldn't expect to discover it the way we discover a new element. We should expect to find it already there, across history, across cultures, across civilizations. And when we actually look, that's exactly what we find everywhere. Human beings recognize that courage is better than cowardice, that justice is better than injustice, that loyalty is better than betrayal, that honesty is better than deceit. The customs differ, the expressions differ, but the moral grammar remains the same. Lewis calls this shared moral inheritance the Tao, not something invented, not something imposed, but something recognized. And that brings us to a conclusion. Once we acknowledge these cross-cultural moral recognitions, we are left with only two real options. Either those moral recognitions are nothing more than a kind of self-deception, a useful illusion, an insubstantial mental aid that helped us survive as a species but has no claim on truth. Or those moral recognitions are real and substantial. They correspond to something that exists beyond us, and they point to a source. There's no third option. The first view says that your deepest moral intuitions, your sense that cruelty is wrong, that justice matters, that some things really ought not be done, are evolutionary tricks, illusory feelings that don't really mean anything. And notice the method. The view asks you to step outside your experience as a moral agent to draw a conclusion about and ultimately deny something that requires a moral agent. That's a failure of methodology. It doesn't explain morality. It eliminates something it never had the tools to understand. The other view says those moral recognitions are not illusions. They're perceptions. Imperfect, yes. Culturally expressed, yes, but real. And like all real perceptions, they point beyond themselves to a moral order, to the structure of reality, to a source. Lewis's claim is not that every culture agrees on every moral detail, it's that every culture knows the same kind of moral thing. And once you see that, the choice becomes unavoidable. Either you distrust the deepest moral knowledge you possess, or you admit that moral truth is real and that moral reality has a ground. One option dissolves morality, the other takes it seriously, and only one leaves us with anything worth living by.